Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Joel, today's topic actually comes out of the episode that I recorded earlier today with Anne-Marie Young. We had a guest on named Dave Mowry, and Dave he is diagnosed bipolar. He has severe anxiety, PTSD, a number of really severe issues that he dealt with that actually ruined his life for about a 14-year period until he finally climbed out. But he did climb out with help, with medication, but also with psychiatric help and so forth. And he did it in a really interesting way. He did it with humor. He learned how to find a way to laugh at stuff that he was going through. And not only did he learn to do that, he actually learned that it was fun and that he actually got enjoyment. He gets the most enjoyment in his life just going through his life day by day, looking for things that he can turn into jokes that he can tell. And he's done stand-up comedy. He trains other people with mental illness to do stand-up comedy to help deal with their situations.
Wow.
A really fascinating interview. So that's kind of what set this up today. Because I said, well, I love, first of all, we were talking about humor. That's always fun.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, well, geez, how can we turn that into something that Joel and I can talk about? Because I mean, you and I, I'm sure we could come up with something that would touch on this. And then I saw a post that you had shared on Facebook about good and evil, and I thought, oh, there we go. Let's tie the two together. So that's how we ended up with today's topic.
Okay, well, that's a great topic, and you know, humor is something that you and I have discussed in various forms and fashions over the years, just about the value of humor, the ability to laugh. It's one of the great antidotes to depression and anxiety naturally. If you get into the biochemistry of that, the hormones released from laughing are amazing, what it does for the brain, similar to exercise, not quite as good as exercise, but similar to exercise as far as how it affects the brain and positive thoughts. So that's the part of what we're trying to accomplish with laughter. But also one of the things that, and this will combine the topics really well, is one thing that I over the years, I've never been in law enforcement, but I have been involved really on both sides of law enforcement, but we won't get into that.
We won't even go there. We've done that enough.
Yeah, I've had some laws enforced on me, but that's
let's just save that. Yeah.
But one of the things that having been on investigations on social services for child abuse and situations, I've walked into some horrific scenes with police officers over the years, and I don't do that anymore. It really was so negative to me for the most part.
Sure.
The one thing that was shocking, but I get it, is the humor that in the most bizarre things that they have. The police officers will often joke about, I can't even really say any of the stuff because it's just so out there, but just basically joking about the most vile, horrible things. They're not making fun. It is a coping mechanism, because when you see something that traumatic, the immediate aftermath of a suicide by a gunshot, for example, is very graphic and very, you can't even describe it. So when you walk in on that, you're in shock the first time you see that, because as bad as you may think it would look, it's far worse than you've ever seen. Yeah. And so they immediately start joking. And at first I thought, well, that's not very respectful. But then I realized you would go crazy if you didn't bring that to the table. So humor actually is one of the great defense mechanisms against, very traumatic things in the body. It's not a cure, by the way, but it simply you need something to relieve what you're seeing. There needs to be sort of a break in what you're seeing. You can't shut your eyes, but at the same time, you need to break that cycle of like, this is unimaginable what I'm looking at. And imagine seeing that, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, multiple times a month, and it just adds up. So a lot of them use humor as a way of the immediate coping skills. I use humor all the time, and with the right clients, the right situations, to help bring their situation to a more manageable place by getting them to see sort of in my traumas, in my events over the years. I often tell the funny side of it. There's a lot of stuff that went on that, while horrifying, it's bizarre, it's funny, it's just it's just almost unbelievable, some of the stuff. So humor can be a great gateway to many things, but it is restorative. And there's people that really, you've talked about this before with laughter and being away to watch shows you like, and
Right.
there's a whole bunch of people that I know that when they're ill with that have been ill with serious illnesses, terminal sometimes, that part of their regimen of healing is just to watch nothing but funny. It's just find something to laugh at, and the more you do that, there's a couple of things that I think takes place in the brain. One is the immune system, as we've talked about multiple times, is always best when it's not stressed with other things.
Right.
Humor is when there is no fight or flight engaged. Humor is you're laughing. It's probably one of your most freeing moments when the body can be like, wow, I'm focused on something good. It's great chemicals being released. So that's a really big healing place. So the immune system has the ability to heal most things given the opportunity, with other factors, good diet, rest, all the other stuff that we know about. And humor adds that piece. So being able to laugh, being able to use it in a way that lifts other people up, being able to do that is it's an amazing tool. I've loved when I was a few times over the years for various situations, I've ended up in like a kid's cancer center. And one of the times that I was there, it was horrifying for me to go in there. I had no idea what was going on. And this kid, I'll never forget this kid. His name is Stephen. He actually got in full recovery. So the story ends really well, but he was horribly ill at the time and didn't know if he was going to live or not. Well, I got to know him, and he had a stand-up routine as a 10-year-old about childhood cancer.
Really?
Yes. And it was, if an adult would have done it, you would have been banned and canceled.
Yeah.
But he was hilarious, and he and the staff used to listen to his stand-up routine. He did his stand-up routine for me, and I'm sitting there going, is it okay for me to laugh? And he goes, that's sort of the point, Joel. You're supposed to laugh here. And so he was hilarious, and he attributes a lot of that to his recovery. He just every day would do a stand-up routine. And he said just the like one of his things, he said one of his routines, I forget one of the jokes, but it involved a catheter. He said, I'm a 10-year-old boy in a catheter. He said, I don't even need to finish that joke. And, and so it was just stuff like that. It was just this bizarre, out there stuff. And just like, when, he said, that feeling after radiation? And I go, no. And he goes, exactly. He's just, just this stuff that was so out there. So humor is always something that's been a part of my life. It's my family. We all had this sarcastic, funny, joking, even in the depths of some of my worst times, humor has been something that I've always brought to the table. And my son, TJ, when I adopted him at 10 or 11, I think I mentioned before, he was totally, he was a very literal child. So he didn't remotely understand sarcasm. So the combination of me being very sarcastic humor and him not understanding it literally made for a sitcom.
Yeah.
Because and eventually as time went on, he'd go, okay, so I think you're joking at this point. I go, yes, I am. So we had to distinguish between them. But at the beginning, he everything was so literal. And it just, that straight man versus the comic routine in some various forms or fashion. So I love humor as a way of coping. It sometimes can be, maybe too much for some people I know some people that use humor like a little too far and not do enough of the other stuff too. Humor can sometimes get to a point where you're ignoring or escaping, and escaping is not always bad, but at some point you got to deal with things too. So it's like anything else. Humor in the right quantity is an amazing tool.
It is. Yeah. And kind of playing off of what you just said, Dave Mowry, my guest who was on the show earlier today, was talking about this sensitivity topic and what are the circumstances under which it's appropriate to use certain kinds of humor because you might be triggering somebody else.
Yes.
And his take was really interesting. He said the people who are most triggered by this kind of stuff are therapists.
Oh, I'm sure.
The people who are, the mental health patients, they're not triggered by it at all. As long as they're the ones who are exploring their own humor, there's no triggering going on. And I thought that was a really important distinction because we can kind of, I mean, there's a whole, political thing going on about woke and cancel and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we do need to be sensitive to other people. But on the other hand, we don't need to be overly sensitive. And there's like a line that you kind of have to pay attention to. Like there are a number of things that he said. For instance, he told some really funny jokes, actually very clean, interestingly enough, but funny jokes that he was telling today. And a couple of them I knew I could never tell. Why? Right. Because I've never been through that kind of mental illness. But it was totally appropriate for him to tell.
Yes.
Totally
and
appropriate.
The idea that people that go through their own stuff I don't have some of the connections with him, shared experiences that he did. So I wouldn't have either the authority or the knowledge to be able to share that with others, but it would be hilarious to hear him share it. And I think that really matters. And, the idea that, we do have a lot going on in our country about what you can say. And, I grew up in an era where, when I was a child, Red Fox, Richard Pryor, eventually Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
And so I would
just have to name those names. Anybody who was alive during that time knows exactly what you're talking about.
So anybody that could be possibly offended by what anybody says in a comedic routine right now never witnessed that.
Throw in Archie Bunker and you got the whole mix.
Yeah. Well, one of the ones he died. I mean, very predictable death, by the way. But Sam Kinison.
Yes.
Are you familiar with Sam? So do some YouTube searches of Sam Kinison stand up.
Oh my goodness.
And let's see how offended we're going to be because he took it to whatever level. And I used to die laughing at Sam Kinison. And it's just the premise for us that laughter and laughter is connection. So what happens is when you laugh and you connect with people, when you find similar things to laugh at, when you can be funny with somebody and you get to know somebody, like I know friends, I know their sense of humor, and it really connects. One of the I think I mentioned this on the show a few weeks ago. I'm constantly reading stuff, and it's a big junk bumbling craziness in my brain. But I remember this article I was reading probably about 4 weeks ago, and it was listing the number 1 through number 10 reasons why a woman falls in love with a man.
Okay.
And it for women between say 25 and 35.
Okay.
And the number 1 thing was the ability to either potentially provide or provide safety, security for the family. That was number 1. It's just, most women are having babies. They want to make sure the dad's a secure dad, safety and all that. Yeah. That makes sense. But shockingly, number 2 was a sense of humor. It was humor. Yeah. was way up there. Looks were sort of way down the list. Yeah. It's like so I was fascinated by that being so high, and it had a lot of comments by women underneath, and a lot of women in the comment section were suggesting actually we'll move humor up to number 1, the other one down to number 2, because
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah,
because it's when you can, especially during times where things are not going well. If you can get somebody to make you laugh, it really will lift you up. I told the story. I don't want to keep telling the story, but about the my neighbor kid when he was 4 years old peeing in the backyard, that making me laugh. And that was a very therapeutic moment for me after the death of my son. And that's a great example of how humor, and he wasn't even intending to be funny. He just it was something that made me laugh. And it was this hilarious moment that the first time since the death of my son I'd actually laughed. And it was and I told you that when that happened, it was the first time I knew I was going to be okay.
Yes,
because I was able to laugh again, because nothing was funny before that.
Yeah, that's important too, because what you're really saying is that becomes a way to climb out of that hole.
Yes. And so it began the upward sort of the upward recovery process of my grieving and getting over it, and just the timing of it. And it was just an amazing moment for me, that this bizarre moment took place where had no intention of laughing. I was cooking some salmon on the grill. It was nothing exciting.
Mm.
And, this happened, and I died laughing. And I came in and I said, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. Because it was a real laugh. It wasn't one of my, oh, that's funny. It was really funny.
Right. That's a key portion, because what you're really talking about there is the emotional connection that goes along with it.
Yes. And the connection between people, and that was a bonding fact. I mean, the young man's 12 now, and we're like great friends, the whole family. And so it was almost, I mean, it really created an incredible friendship amongst us. Just that one meeting. So humor brings incredible value. It is something that people of all different, types of backgrounds, if you can find humor in a commonality, humor sells. Humor unites if you allow it to unite.
And that's the key word, allow. And I want to tie back into the original topic, which was laughter and humor, more precisely, finding something funny in the context of good and evil.
Yes.
And the reason I wanted to tie it into that is because good and evil is really about judgment.
Yes.
It's about we tend to be very judgmental as human beings. What we're really doing is we're saying, I don't like this, so I want this to change so that I feel better about it. But nevertheless, whatever the reasoning is, we're still trying to find some way to cast judgment, to cast blame. That's why we're looking at the good and evil picture in the first place.
Yes.
And in the context of looking at that, that's where we lose our sense of humor.
Absolutely.
That's why this is kind of they're kind of like two disparate topics, because we don't associate laughter and joking with good and evil, but they almost have to be part of the same conversation. Otherwise, you go too far in one direction or the other.
Right. And that's the problem. You with anything, like you're saying, good and evil, the definition of that, if you ask 100 people what evil is and what good is, we may have some common answers, but a lot of it is going to be perspective based. And
it will. And there'll be a lot of differences in it too.
Yeah. A lot of them have religious connotations to it, or what that means. A lot of them are going to just be, some basics, but there's some basic things I think we can all agree on. This is pretty good, and this is definitely evil kind of stuff for the most part. But within it, that we're good and evil. I know people say, well, you shouldn't joke about that. That's not something that, and I have areas that I don't think you should joke about. I really don't. I think there's areas that, my mind, and that's just me. I'm not saying everybody else. I won't joke about certain things. I don't find that funny, but certain things funny. But I do know people that, have been through some of those things that can joke themselves, and I have no problem with that. But it's just not something for me. And I think with everything that we do, no matter what, everything is a perspective. Perspective dictates everything. So your perspective of good and evil, or what's funny or what not funny, those are all things that are built on a perspective. So being able to sort of find humor in the worst of times, in my worst of times, and I had some really bad times, my worst of times, I found humor. My best of times, I found humor. And so, the idea that even when I was in jail, I found a ton of humor in jail. Now, it wasn't a lot of people I could share my humor with, but I just found the absurdity of jail hilarious. It's just, it was just this stuff, and it's almost like a sitcom. You're sitting back watching this surreal event.
Yeah.
30 guys in this big pod, and definitely different backgrounds, and just watching those interactions was hilarious. And
I can see that.
And it wasn't dangerous. I didn't feel it was dangerous or anything. It was just fun to watch all the way people related to each other, and just how you're forced to be together. A great comedy concept is when you force different people into a room together and you see how they react. That's all jail is, in a weird way.
I think it's an important thing to point out is that if you were in a fight or flight situation, if you were in a situation where there was imminent danger, that would have been a different scenario. But you weren't in that kind of a situation.
No. I was in a county jail, and not that I should give jail lessons to people, but usually usually your county jails are really safe. There's not a lot of violence. They're they're simple. Prison is an entirely different concept.
Mhm.
That's where there's not a lot of going to be. If you're going to laugh, you better laugh internally. You don't need to.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a lot of, and that you are in fight or flight often when you're in prison. But county jail, I just call it sort of kindergarten jail. It's not.
Kindergarten, yeah.
It's the food's ungodly bad, and you're really
Mhm.
bored. But I never ever felt in danger.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's important. One of the reasons I like this topic is that it's actually a conscious reminder to me of something that I do anyway, which is whenever I find myself encountering a question about good and evil, if I can do so, and I usually do either consciously or subconsciously, if I can do so, I try to ask myself what's funny about the situation.
Yes.
And the reason I do that is if I can't find something funny about it, that's a clue to me. It's a clue to me that I'm taking it too seriously.
Yes.
That there's something in it that I am really attached to, that until I find a way to let go of it, it's going to haunt me. It's going to
Absolutely.
haunt me and haunt me and haunt me and haunt me. And it can actually, and I know from personal experience, when I let stuff go that way, when I let it, kind of become the takeover experience, it doesn't end well for me.
No,
It never has.
I agree. I can see
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah, me
so for
either.
me, I mean that it's almost like it's a tool in a toolbox. It's
It,
it's
it
it, it's a way to just say to myself, how am I doing with this thing that because and of course anytime we're talking about good and evil, we're talking about real life situations that have some serious consequences and so forth. So how am I doing with this emotionally? What is my emotional response going on there? If I can remember to ask myself that, I can always find perspective on it.
and that's it. And it when you, in a sense, we talked about the emotional guidance scale the last time we had a show a couple
Mhm.
weeks ago, and in a sense, you're looking at the humor guidance scale. Where is the
Yeah.
humor in this event? And if I can find the humor, and if there's no humor there, then you know what that means too.
Mm.
There's been a moment in, like again with the death of my son, I've just never found any humor in that whatsoever.
Sure.
And so that one, yeah, that's sort of one you can say there's just no humor in it. But what is interesting with the death of my son, what I did find myself thinking about a lot was all the humorous interactions him and I had.
Ah.
So there was that, because and every time daylight saving time changes, I think of him, because when he was in my home, the very first time that happened, I told him, you got to go to bed early tonight because time's changing. He never believed me. He just thought I was being sarcastic because time doesn't change.
Oh my goodness.
And we had this big discussion. I go, son, no, it really is. He goes, I know you're kidding me. I go, no, it literally is changing. And then as time went on, of course, he understood it.
Sure.
And then as an adult, I would text him, time changes tomorrow. And he goes, you're making that up. That was so it's one of our things that stays. So that I found that. So when he passed away, I had to find all the millions of things that made me laugh about him, because we had this him and I had a great humor connection, and so we always had funny times to talk, and so that was something. So humor, even within that, his death had no humor, but our times together helped me heal. So even with that, I was able to heal using humor as a way to remind myself of all the fun times we've had.
That's so beautiful, especially when you made reference earlier to the fact that your relationship with him, because he was so literal about things,
Yes.
was almost like living in a sitcom. So you literally leveraged that aspect and said, let's build on that. Let's make that a big part of how I think about him as I think about him in the past. Yeah.
And his responses were always just so literal. And I would often find myself in situations where I would say something, and he would. A great example, we were driving down to Florida to see my parents, and I was on a call with a client. My client's name was Jerry. And so I'm talking to Jerry, and I'm hanging up the phone. So, all right, Jerry, I'll talk to you soon. Well, TJ's in the back seat. He's listening to whatever he's listening to. He goes, do you know Jerry Springer? And I go, yeah, I do. That was Jerry. And so I just I thought he knew I was kidding. So we get to my parents' house, and they're happy to see us. Mom had cooked us this great dinner, and so in the middle of dinner, TJ goes, "Oh my God, my dad knows Jerry Springer." And, and now I'm having to go, okay, wait a minute. I don't know Jerry Springer. You, once again, I was being sarcastic and as literal. So again, I have a million of those. So no matter what, I always encourage people. People ask me, and I believe grief is an individual thing. I've talked about it a million times. You can't tell anybody how they grieve. But if you ask me my advice for grieving, always find the humor. Find the funny times we had together. Find the times that we laughed. My dad was an amazing. He always had the absolute worst jokes, but they were hilarious, and he put them on the same loop over and over. And you just knew the joke. He used to say, "I'm busier than a one-armed paper hanger."
Oh, dear.
I don't even know what that means, but it just became part of our. I don't know what a paper hanger is. I don't know why I would only have one arm, but
I think he's referring to a wallpaper hanging, but I get it.
Maybe, but he had imagine 100 of those, and we would roll our eyes at the dad jokes, and he would laugh every time, act like we never heard him before, repeat it. My dad had an incredible sense of humor, and he would tell jokes and often get them wrong, and then laugh at getting them
that's
wrong.
Always good. Yeah.
So
someone who can't tell a joke and who can't tell a joke severely. I mean, like they really mess it up. That's actually one of the funniest kind of persons you can listen to. Yeah, just because you're waiting for you're like hanging on bated breath. What's the next thing they're going to say that just screws it up?
Yes. And so when I think of my dad, I don't think of the several years he was in the nursing home loss. I think of my dad and his humor. When I think of TJ, I think of TJ and our connection with humor, and him and the very different senses of humor we had, but we always found a way to laugh. My sister and I still have a very unique connection with humor. She can look at me, and I can look at her, and we can know what we're thinking, and then so whether we're at a funeral, a wedding, or in church when we were younger, I could look at her and she would I can make her crack up ridiculously just by looking, just by giving her a look. And if everybody were looking at it, they would have no idea what took place. Yeah. So there is that. So there is humor is a solvent. It's a connector. It does a lot of things. And so when you're talking about, like you're talking about sort of the comparison within good and evil and all the other stuff, humor can be sort of an antidote for all choices. It can add to the good, and it can be a sort of an attack on the evil on some level.
Yeah, I don't even think of it as an attack, although it can be, certainly. I think of it more in terms of how do I feel about it differently. So to give you an example, my father, at the very end of his life, the very last year he was alive, he was in pretty rough shape. He had Parkinson's. And with Parkinson's disease, you get to a point where you can't swallow anything. So you can imagine how that doesn't end very nicely.
Right.
But we were visiting him, and he was in it wasn't a hospital. It was more like a care center home kind of a thing. And it was institutional. So it had hallways. So we got him into a wheelchair, and we're just wheeling him around and interacting with him and talking with him and so forth. And we started treating it like we were in a wheelchair race. So anytime somebody we'd pass them in the wheelchair. Okay, we're coming around the outside. Just crazy, silly, stupid stuff like that, just to kind of break the whole pattern of my dad's at the end of his life, and he's about ready to transition over, and it's probably not going to be a real nice transition. We just skipped all that.
Yeah,
we said we're just going to interact. We're having fun with this stupid damn wheelchair race against nobody. There was nobody else in the race.
Yeah, but that's the stuff I love. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think one of the great benefits of that is that it changes the way you think about something. So
it really does.
I'm describing for our audience what my dad went through, but I don't really think of him that way.
No,
I don't think of him going through all that. I think of him as the man that I knew, as the man who I loved, and all that. If I were stuck on what was evil about that situation, because that's where the good and evil part would come into that. If I was stuck on the evil of how he was literally being denied certain medical treatments because of the political climate going on at the time, and I could have gotten really upset about that. But I took that off my radar by finding a humorous way to look at the situation and saying, you know what, I'm not going to focus there. I'm going to focus on this other part because this is my dad. This isn't some statistic. This isn't some political battle. This isn't some medical contest going on or anything like that. This is just my dad. Yes. I'm just interacting with my dad. So I'm going to look at it that way.
Yes,
and that made all the difference.
Yes. And it's being able to use it in that way is absolutely the way to sort of, it can be a filter. It can smooth things out. When you look at the humor of everything, the process that we're all going to, at some point we're all going to die. This physical body will come to an end. We've pretty much established that.
We pretty much established that. There's a joke right there.
Yeah, I mean, the jury's still out. I'm still working on that concept. So, I mean, I'm not sure I am, but I am beginning to get the evidence.
The research is kind of pointing in that direction. That's what you're saying? Yeah, okay.
But the main important thing for me is the people around me. And not that I'm worried about how people will remember me, but my ultimate hope is however that goes, whether it's tomorrow or 30 years from now, I would love to just people to say he was a weird dude. He loved to laugh about the stuff he was into. I just would love for there to be a smile on their face just because of random stuff, and that's what I hope my memory is. I hope that's what is left. You could focus on some of the bad things I've been through, or some of the bad things I've done, or you can focus on what's happened since, or how I view it now, because that's all this is. Where this experience of life, and when you discover the ability to, number one, not take yourself so seriously. That's a big thing. When you can sort of laugh at the absurdity of, the absurdity of me gambling, the absurdity, all the stuff that took place. I could just do hours of stuff about all the funny stuff that took place during gambling, just the absurd thinking and the surreal behavior of people in Las Vegas. It was just wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to find surreal behavior. That's a good place to look for it.
It really is. It really is, and it just just people's perspective, and in life when you walk around, there's people that you almost want to shake them and go, "Can you smile? Can you laugh? Is there anything? Is there something we can pull?" And again, what happens? One of the problems when I recommended to this a gentleman, he was, I don't know, 67 years old, which isn't old, but he had lost his wife, and he thought of himself as very old. He thought of himself as he lived in a nice home, and he didn't isolate because I'm very lonely, and he had this narrative. And so as we were working on his sort of life coaching plan, he everything I would say, well, do you like this? No. Do you like this? No. I said, okay. So clearly you don't like anything, and
wow.
and so he clearly was shut down to really most concepts. Yeah. So I'm like, do you find anything funny? And so I just started with that, and he goes, oh, it's been 20 years since I really laughed. And I said, well, what did you last? Yeah. What did you laugh at? And I forget what it was. Oh, the movie Airplane, of all things. The movie Airplane.
Yeah, okay. Boy, there's an old one.
Yeah, that is an old one. So that shows you how long ago he laughed. And so,
yeah, right.
So I said, well, you like that kind of ridiculous humor. So, I said, go watch the movie again. I don't think it'll work. So I finally coaxed him into watching that, and then the various things and some of the stand-up comedians, and then he became more and more open to it. And there's a comedy club here in Richmond. I don't know if it's still here or not, but he started getting into the comedy a little bit, and he wasn't going to do comedy himself, but I talked him in one night to going and just laughing at this comedy. Just try to find, I said, instead of going in with a filter of I'm old and nobody wants to be there. So he goes in, and there's this young man with some kind of condition, some type of palsy. His arm was, but he was a comedian, and his whole routine was about his disability.
Right.
And he said, at first I just started to I was disgusted that he was making fun of his and then he realized, he said, it's his disability. He can do what he wants to do.
That's right.
And once he did that, he said, and then he flipped to, this kid is I'm worried about my situation. Look at him, and he's laughing about. And that one night changed his life. He actually introduced
Wow.
himself to the kid, and the kid said, hey, I'm going to be at these shows. Would you like to meet me there? He became very good friends with this kid. And it when I say kid, he's 20 or something like that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but it just became this. It had this great friendship. It got him out of the house. He went out. The young man eventually got a sort of a secondary on some touring comedian show. The older guy went around to see some of the shows with him. It changed his life. And
Wow.
and it was just this idea that. And he said I never would have thought about that. But he said, was that moment when he said, I realized I was just disgusted with what that kid was saying. And I realized, man, I am looking at this all wrong. If he can laugh at this, I gotta rethink everything. And it just changed instantly for him.
That's a great breakthrough, because I mean, I'm a 67-year-old man, and I understand how it's very easy to slide into that, especially as you get up there in years. It is very easy to slide into it. I've had to guard against it a few times. So I can see how you could do that. And when you were describing how he hadn't laughed in 20 years, I was thinking, oh my God, he fell all the way. He's all the way in it. And I was like, how do you climb out of that at that point? Well, you found the way. You did it through humor, the very thing we're talking about today.
Well,
I mean, that's great.
And that's the thing. So when you for me, laughing after TJ died was a signal. For him, laughing made him realize I can still laugh. And and he started talking about, when his wife passed away, she had a very long illness, and so he was around the evil of all that for a long time. That feeling that he never thought her care was appropriate. The doctors didn't do a good job in so everything was just this negative. And he had, after she passed away, he just went home to die sort of in his mind. And he just kept living. And he just, but once he broke out of that, he wanted to, it's been a few years. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I'm sure he's fine, because he was just, everything was, it just started back up. At one time he was talking about going back to work or starting a new company, just time to, he said, I'm not going to. He sold his house. That was another good thing. He sold the house and got something new. But the premise that we're looking for whatever jump starts our soul. Sometimes when you need your soul jump started, and for me, laughter is one of the easiest things to find and one of the quickest ways to jump start it. Because if you think about it, if you can laugh about something, you're going to be okay. The body's saying,
Well, that was the lesson of the kid peeing in the backyard. I mean, you realized at that point you were going to be okay. And
it was just this whole, as everything unfolded, it was a gift. I was like, okay, and now then. And by the way, the period of time from when TJ passed away until this kid made me laugh is probably about 6 months, really. 5 or 6 months. And I was going to work every day, and I was people didn't know. I mean, I was doing my normal routine. I was quote unquote laughing at work or whatever, but it was not real. It was just
you were
sort of my, I was doing the role of Joel, the life coach, for 6 months. And I would still go to the gym, but I'd come home at night. I didn't do anything in the evenings. I just sort of hung out and, just didn't think things were to get better. And then the epiphany of laughter, the awakening of laughter, followed by it's like, let's go. I put my foot on the gas even more, and and just sort of accepted all that came with that. And it was just it was the single biggest turning point post TJ's death. It was phenomenal that event happened. I'm glad I was able to seize on that.
It's such a great story, such a beautiful story for a number of reasons, not the least of which, in the context of our overall topic, the topic of laughter around good and evil, it's a reminder that we don't have to get stuck in the horror of something that happened. It's a reminder that we can actually use humor. We can actually find humor as a way to climb out. That's not the easiest thing to remember, especially if you're depressed, if you're in anxiety, high anxiety or whatever. I mean, it's certainly the situation that my guest earlier today was in. He described it very nicely. I asked him, what's, because I can't imagine really. I mean, I tried, but I can't imagine what it's like to be bipolar. He says, well, bipolar with anxiety, you can kind of think of it this way. Most people, if they had like a bucket that they had certain amounts of anxiety flowing up, maybe they get like half full half the time, and then the bucket empties out. Whereas for him, the bucket was always full, and it was just like one tip away from spilling over every single day of his life. And right. I thought that was a good way of describing it. But when you think about what that must be like to live like that, it's going to be hard to find humor. It's going to be a real challenge because you're so focused on this really horrible stuff that's going on. I mean, that feels like a pure evil situation. So when he found it, and I asked him, how did you do that? How did you find it? He says, I'm not really sure how I found it. I'm not really sure what made the difference. I just kind of had an inspiration that came to me. But that was about the best he could do to explain it. What came through to me when he said that was that the inspiration came at the time that he most needed it. In other words, it's almost like the brain was kicking into gear and saying, here's how I survive. Here's how I go back into living mode again. And it happened all subconsciously. I mean, he didn't have this wasn't like a thought process going on. Oh, I'm going to do survival mode here. It was all a completely subconscious process. But it basically goes to show we are built for health. And somehow in the most horrible situation that he could possibly have ever lived in, he was able to find health because his brain said, okay, time to do some health. Here's some inspiration. Go for it.
And and whether whatever chain of events happen, the body is always healing. It's seeking healing. The brain's seeking healing. Even depression and anxiety, it's always, the body doesn't want that. It's trying to come up with a formula for it, for a remedy. It can't always. And your perspective, when I say everything's perspective, I make it sound like that's so easy. By no means. I know changing your perspective is, when you're stuck, is one of the hardest things to do. You're literally just going against everything that you're feeling. But that, whatever it leads to, I always believe that either the universe or God or whatever your belief system is, the whole point of all of this, life in general, is we're resilient creatures. The body's mechanism is amazing to cope with things. It's just, we don't really understand because it's not talked about, but there is no chemical that you can take from a pharmacy that your body cannot produce itself.
Mm-hmm. That's worth thinking about right there.
Yes. So the idea that your body can produce these chemicals or an equivalent chemical, not maybe the exact identical chemical. But a chemical that does the same thing is there. But when the body is impaired or in fight or flight or stuck, that mechanism that releases or builds all that is not available to us. And the immune system, that's when it's compromised, it's weakened. And then that doesn't get to happen. So when it comes to mental health, being able to laugh, sort of, again, the same chemicals that are in some, it would take probably 9 separate antipsychotic or mood altering pills to come up with what happens in your brain when you laugh.
Yes.
You're taking like 9 separate ones. They're all produced internally and they're hilarious. When you think about it, the more you laugh, the deeper it is, and it just goes. And
in fact, if I remember correctly, you would probably know this, so maybe you can correct me on this. But if I remember correctly, there are a whole bunch of hormones in the body, many of which are positive, what we call the positive hormones, the feel-good hormones. And if I remember correctly, laughter is the only one that triggers all of them.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is astonishing, first of all, but second of all, it's like, hey, pay attention. This is important.
There are conflicting studies, but I agree with that. What you're saying, the main study says yes, it releases all of them. Others will argue that that you can get studies. We talk about studies.
The studies are what they are.
But but you can feel it. There's just certain things that you can feel when you're getting better. There's an internal thing going on, and laughter to me signals hope. Laughter is a connector. Laughter is some. I want to be around people that make me laugh. One of the reasons I love talking to kids is
yes,
they have the ability to make. and they don't even when they're not trying to be funny is when they're the funniest. They're hilarious.
It's true. It's true. I was also asking my guest earlier today about how he learned to look for humor. In other words, he was not in a place before he got started doing this where humor came naturally to him. Quite the opposite, in fact. He had trouble laughing at stuff, but he was encouraged by, I think it was a comedian who was actually going around to various facilities where mental patients were there to hear what he was saying, who was essentially arguing, learn to become a stand-up comedian. Here's how you do it. And you go through your life looking for, where's the humor in what I'm dealing with. And when he tried to do it, it took a while. It took him, I don't remember what he said, but it took him like days to come up with his first joke. But he finally found it. And what he discovered along the way is that once you start developing that, he made reference to neuroplasticity. You're retraining your brain to always look for it.
Yes.
So it becomes a habitual thing to do. And the more that you do it, the more that you find it. And much to his astonishment, I kind of equate this to my experience with doing this podcast. As you know, I started the podcast because I was looking for help for myself, and I ended up discovering that I love doing it much more than I ever realized that I would. Similarly, he has gone into this thing of, okay, I'm going to find ways to find humor in what I'm dealing with, and found that it was immensely joy creating for him just to find them.
Yes.
One of the questions I asked him about was, do you laugh at your own stuff? And he says, no, I never laugh at my own jokes, but I have enjoyment in them. He says the fun part for him, the enjoyable part, is finding something that he knows someone else is going to find funny enough to laugh at. Yes. And he says the stuff that his sense of humor is built around is stuff that almost always people are laughing at. They're willing to laugh at it when they hear it. So for him, it's just joyful to find one little thing, like an absurdity of some kind. Say, oh yeah, people are going to love that. They're going to laugh at that. That to him is joy. And that's really what kept him going. He had the same experience with that as I have doing the podcast. Like, I got to do more of this. That was his feeling. I got to learn more of this. I got to find more of this. And so now he's constantly looking throughout his life. Every single day of his life, he's got his radar out there. Like, okay, is there anything I'm finding funny today? He might not even find anything funny for 5 days, but he's constantly looking for it. And when he finds it, yes, he found another one.
I love that. That's good.
Yeah.
And but anything you filter for, eventually you will start finding, and you'll automatically do it. If you and that's looking for the humor in things, and on a bigger scale, like we had talked about, in previous shows, the pervasive way news is delivered now is through a negative lens.
Oh yeah.
Politics is through a negative lens. There's nobody saying what they're going to really do. They're saying what the other people are going to take away from you. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So we're not filtering for any positives often, and so it doesn't seem to be things that are going right. So we'll tend to there's nothing funny going on. We're at a critical time. And I think I told you this again. This is recently we talked about this. In my lifetime, we have been on the brink of destruction 50 times. It's just it's the end now. It's all falling apart. This isn't sustainable. It's all going to fall apart. Our country's done, and some of that was church stuff. And this is the year that Armageddon's happening, and you're like, oh my God, is it that time? And it's like, I'm on my 5th Armageddon right now, and we're good.
All right. Well done, by the way. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, hope most people live long enough will get 5 or 6 Armageddons in.
I remember back in the 1970s, there were a number of interesting kind of iconic things that happened in the 70s. One of which was things would happen at airports. Now, airports in the 70s were completely different from what they are now.
Oh yeah,
the security and all that is has totally remapped it. But at that time, it was no different from, say, going to a train station or a bus station. It was very similar to that. And you could see a lot of interesting things that were iconic in the 70s by going to an airport. For instance, Hare Krishnas. There were always a group of Hare Krishnas at the airport who were dancing and doing their stuff and so forth. Or there was the guy who carried the sign that said "The end is near."
Yes.
And they were in all the airports. It was amazing. I mean, these it's like, did they have like an affiliation? Did you have to join a club so you could get the sign? But these guys were everywhere carrying these signs saying "The end is near." And it was so iconic. People, comedians would make jokes about it. It would be included in talks that were being made and so forth because it happened everywhere. It was so ubiquitous. So there's a perfect example of that kind of cataclysmic thing that after a while, you see enough of it, you say, "Oh, okay. Well, we're doing that again."
We're gonna end the world's coming again this week. So
Yeah.
and it's one of the things that I learned from me is listen, we tend to, as human beings, take everything way too serious, I believe,
Mm.
often, and I'll challenge people to say, okay, on September 9th last year, what was your biggest worry? What was your biggest concern?
Yeah.
What was haunting you that day? And you might have some nebulous belief, but I promise you, you're not remembering the
You
same.
not remember the exact one,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. And what is the last thing that happened that you didn't survive? You've survived it all. I mean,
No,
it just
survived all of them, right?
yeah. And so when you start to realize, and I'm not I mean, I take my job very seriously. I do.
Mhm.
I'm very serious about my job, but part of what I have to understand is helping people realize we're incredibly resilient creatures, and we
We
have
are.
all these mechanisms within us that we don't realize they're assets. And humor is one of the greatest assets available to us for many things. And like I said, it's a great connector for some people. And you when you one of the things I do when I give a big talk, the first time I was giving a big talk in front of 5,000 people. Uh, that's a lot of people the first time you
Mhm.
give a talk. And so I was the third person to talk, and there were two more people after me.
I
So,
remember you told me this story. This is great. I love this
yeah,
story.
when I sort of fumbled the papers and
Yeah.
yeah. So the give me advice. I'm not normally nervous when I talk to people, but uh the guy that was one of the old time guys there was saying, just get up there and, flub up or something as you walk up, and then make a joke about it, and it'll break the humor, break the silence or whatever you're feeling inside of you. So I don't write anything down. I don't write anything down for my speeches. They're all in my head. So
Mhm.
I can give you an hour talk about whatever topic you want, and I don't need it on. It's all in my head.
Mhm.
Uh, but going on stage, I grabbed a handful of just copy paper. It looked like paper. And as I was walking up, I just fake tripped and my papers went all over the floor. And I've gathered them. I go, that was a great entrance, wasn't it? And everybody cracks up laughing. And to me, I needed that to happen. And a lot
Mm.
of people didn't realize that was staged, by the way.
Yeah.
And but it was just something and then once I got up there, then they calmed down, and afterwards everybody's like, man, when you dropped the paper, I felt really embarrassed for you. And I go, and I didn't ever tell anybody it was, I mean, I tell everybody now, but then I was like, yeah, well, whatever. And but I like to break the ice with something like that. Just just you get in there, you get them to laugh, and also they're comfortable. There's a little empathy from them. Oh, that
Mhm.
guy screwed up a little bit, and it was all planned. There was no dropping of. I don't even carry papers, but I did that night.
I don't even carry papers, but I did that night. I like that.
Yeah,
Well, it's a great reminder also that humor is not something that has to be big. It's not something that has to be, super dramatic, carefully thought out. It can be like dumb, little dumb thing.
yeah, oh yeah,
Copying papers. I mean, that's about as mundane as it gets, but it
yeah,
turns into humor because of the context. The context is what made it the humor, actually.
oh yeah,
I mean, if you just drop papers next to an elevator, people say, "Oh, let me help you pick that
yeah,
up," and it was, no big deal.
yeah.
But everybody knew that you were giving a talk, and the instant thought that they all had when they saw the papers on the floor was, "Oh my God, he just
Oh,
lost all
poor
his
guy.
notes."
He's nervous. He dropped all his papers, and
Yeah,
if they would have
he's
looked
not
at
going to
it,
remember what his speech was all about.
yeah. And and again, there's nothing on the papers. There's just they were
Blank
blank papers. I just grabbed some blank papers. So it was just this idea of allowing that. And I will with a lot of my clients that are very resistant, especially my younger clients. The stoic 15-year-old who's determined not to say anything.
Yeah.
If I get him to laugh, it's over. I got him. And you
Well,
know,
you actually provided a good example of that a couple shows back. You talked about, I don't remember who it was exactly, but it was a kid who you couldn't reach under any circumstances, so you started doing your absurd questions.
yeah, yeah,
Question 146 or something like
yeah.
that.
What's your favorite Beatle?
What's your favorite Beatle? Yes.
and he broke. I mean, after 100 and something questions, he goes, "Oh my God, dude, what? No." He goes, "This is stupid." Why? And I got him to, he laughed at it. I go, "Is it Japanese Beetle?" That's what most people say. And he goes, I don't know. Yeah, I guess. Or and then once I got him talking, it was fine. We developed a great therapeutic bond, and we met several times after that. It was great. But humor can, because they're walking in thinking it's me against them. They're
Yeah.
gonna,
Oh yeah,
you know,
sure.
and I'm not against them. I want to be on their side, but
Right.
I got to get them to understand that I am on their side. It's not I'm not here to tell their parents what they're saying. I'm
Hmm.
here to be your advocate. I'm here to, and humor. All of my clients, I don't ever like to say all of them, but most of my clients and I always have some good, fun laughs. I mean, I got a couple of clients that aren't really humorous, and I've learned to just let that go. But the majority of them are, you know, they love to send me jokes. I get funny memes all the time from them, and and people know I like absurd things, so
Hmm.
they'll send me like absurd things, and it's just, I love that. That's great. Just something that's off the
It
beaten
is.
path.
It's fabulous. Anything that's absurd. I mean, I was talking about this also with the guest earlier today. Anything that's absurd to me is the best kind of humor,
It is.
because if it's absurd, it's clean.
Yes.
If it's absurd, you're not tearing somebody else down. You're
Yes.
not you're not ragging on somebody in order to get a laugh. You're just dealing with the absurdity of the situation.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what makes absurd beautiful. I mean,
It is.
I like when we do these episodes, when we're recording these sessions. Now, I'm not a comedian. I'm not trying to be a funny guy doing this, but I like to insert humor wherever I can.
Sure.
And it's like I said to Dave earlier, my way of inserting humor is to look for something that we're talking about, and where's the absurd side of it, and then say what that absurd side is. And a lot of the time it doesn't come out as funny, and I don't worry about it. That's okay. I just look for the next absurd thing, because the absurd things are the ones that at some point they come out as being funny.
Yeah.
And then it works, and it's great, and it's
Well, and,
clean,
and
and nobody's offended, nobody's put off. It's not like I stepped on somebody's toes. It's not like I triggered somebody. We just
yeah.
talked about something that was absurd.
Yeah. And when you're able to, and sometimes, where you can use absurd statements that without having to say more, you can say a lot.
Oh yeah.
Here's an example, and this does step on toes, and I don't care. So
Dave
just
said
give
the
you a
same thing, by the way. Just saying.
yeah. So there was I'm at a thing one time, that this event, and it was the thing about helping kids.
Hmm.
And you had all these community services coming in. How can we best help kids?
Okay.
So there's this priest that stands up. I don't even need to really get too much deeper. And he goes, well, the Catholic Church helps more kids than
Dear.
anybody.
I can hardly wait.
And all I do is go, huh, really? And the whole place dies laughing. I didn't have to say anything
because it was so obvious.
It was so obvious. And he goes, I go, all I said was, huh, really? And just and I didn't have to say anymore. And again, any Catholics offended by that, Walt at LOAtoday.net for any complaints.
I love how you do that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
I really appreciate it.
So, but I didn't,
right?
I just put it out there. Everybody else I like the jokes that fill themselves. You know what I'm saying? You don't even have to, just and again, to me, no disrespect to this guy. I'm sure he's a pretty good guy. I'm sure he's probably not a pedophile.
Yeah, sure.
Probably 60% chance he is, but not anyway. So statistically, I'm just going with statistics. But the idea that this guy couldn't read the room enough to go, can I say something a little differently? Or we have program. You don't just stand up and go, the Catholic Church has always been supportive of children. I'm like, really?
Yeah. It's almost like he need to have his own snare drum to do a rim shot on after that.
I would love to have been somebody in a band in the background could have given me
yeah.
If I'd have had time to pull up my phone, I would have. But it was just, anyway, that was one of those.
That's where you all want to say. But seriously, folks.
But seriously. Yeah, I just, and I could have said a lot more, but I didn't. And it was just like, really? And it was. And then every single person behind him laughed. It was just this, oh, yeah. So sometimes absurd statements can be humorous without the person even intending remotely to be humorous, or like, it's just the idea that we live in a society where you have you have all these perspectives, you have all these people, and everybody brings something to the table. So how I see something is not necessarily how you're going to see it, and vice versa, or other people. And living with that humor is what can unite all of it.
Oh yeah.
Because when you like different shows like The Office. I know a lot of people that love The Office, and The Office really didn't have a lot of jokes per se, but it was a personality-based sitcom where it just, again, absurd situations with these absurd personalities, and it was incredibly, incredibly funny.
Yeah. The other thought that keeps coming to my mind is you made reference earlier to the polarity that goes on particularly in the U.S., but also around the world. You talked about the news, about politics, and so forth. And I think all my regular listeners know I have this little bit of a warped side of me that likes to pay attention to the political world from a distance. I don't dive into it. I don't do the deep dive because I don't want to poison myself with it. But I like looking at it from the distance. And to me, it ties in beautifully to the topic today, because the topic is finding humor in the battle of good and evil. And from the perspective of people on both sides of the divide, that is a battle of good and evil. They can't agree on what the good side is and what the evil side is, but they both see it as a battle of good and evil.
Yes.
And I won't even tell you any of the particular pieces of humor because I don't want to offend anybody on that. But what I do on a regular basis is I'm looking at the various reports that are out there, the news reports and so forth, about what the different sides are saying. I can't tell you how often I'm laughing.
Oh,
I mean, seriously, I just it's a good thing nobody else is in my head while I'm reading this stuff, because I'd be literally offending like 80% of the country. But because they don't hear that, it's okay. I'm the only one who hears it. But I'm just sitting there and I am just floored with how much absurd stuff that goes on in that arena.
There's so much, and you're right.
It's crazy.
You have to keep it to yourself, and
you do, yeah.
But and I have a lot of friends. We'll send each other these funny, and funny things, and many people. Politically, I'm not a big fan of either side, as you know. I don't and I don't keep up with all the stuff back and forth and all the drama, but you'll see these most absurd things from both sides, and
it's crazy.
I'll get these things, and you're like. You can't make it up because
you can't.
It's funnier than stuff you could make up, really.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's hilarious.
So I bring that up not because I want to offend anybody, but because I want to tell people if you're finding yourself overwhelmed by something like that, look for the humor in it.
Yeah,
it's one of the best ways to get that overwhelmment out of your system.
Absolutely,
especially with something where there's that divisive a thing going on. When it's that divisive, if you can find humor in, I guarantee you will just wipe it right out of your system.
Humor is, I've used the word solvent a lot, and I love that word for humor. Humor softens, it loosens, it unclogs. Humor does a lot of things, and the being able to share humor, the people that I love know I love them because the way I share humor. They it's I laugh with them, and I encourage them with humor, and they know that, and we can be in, I have absurd humor, so the things that, I was in the car with a dear friend. She was driving. This has been a while back. And these are silly things that we'll do. So she doesn't like me to drive, so I let her drive. Okay, so I'm good with that. She's a good driver for the most part. And so we're driving down the road. Well, you know how they have the manhole covers on some of these older roads that you hit them? And so after about the 9th manhole cover in a row that she hit, she missed one. So I said, "Do you need to back up and get that one?"
I love that. You missed one.
Yeah, you missed one. And so she laughed. And I mean, we do that. And it's just this connection that you have to know somebody for that to be funny. You know what I mean? You have to. And it was just, it was, and the whole concept that she would prefer to drive. I get that. I'm actually great because she didn't mind driving. I don't like driving and where you got to park in rough place. She just will drive anywhere. So it's always cool when we go somewhere. She drives, but I'll point out like, oh, well, we can back up and make it 100%.
And the best part is she can go along with the joke. That's the really
Of
good
course, she
part.
loved it. She
I
laughed.
love that.
I forget what thing she said, but it was funny, I'm sure. And so,
Fabulous stuff.
but also as a parent, one of the things that I found so important was finding humor in dealing with my kid, because you know how stressful, and this will be my last story, but when I was living on Anna Maria Island with my son TJ, and he was a wild child, and I have many great wild TJ stories, but he came to me one day and he said, look, me and whoever his buddy was, they wanted to go in town to a party. We were on an island. You have to drive into town to do that. And I said, son, this is not going to end well. I mean, you have a hard time getting home at curfew when you're on the island. And I go, 11 o'clock, you must be home at 11 o'clock. You must be home. And he goes, okay. I said, so you have an agreement with me. You'll be home at 11 o'clock. Now, I knew TJ had no shot of being home at 11 o'clock deep down. So 11 o'clock rolls around, no word from TJ. 11:30, I'm calling his cell phone. These are back in the old flip phone days. It's off. There's no find my phone. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Call him again, 11:30, no TJ. Midnight, no TJ. About 2 a.m, I called my sister. Said, "What point do I need to call the police here? I don't know what to do. I don't know where he's at. He didn't know where the party was going to be, but I assure you, the party's not going on." So finally, probably about 3:15, I hadn't been asleep. The phone rings and it's TJ. I am so mad, and I'm ready just to go. So I answer the phone and go, "What?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "We have a dilemma." And he just disarmed me.
Understatement of the year.
Yeah. I laughed. I said, "No, TJ, you have a dilemma."
You have a dilemma, yeah.
I said, "Where are you at? What happened?" He goes, "Well, there's these two girls." And I said,
Stop right there.
I said, "Where are you at? I'm coming to get you." And it turns out these girls took him to another party. They promised to bring him back. They left him there, and then we got stuck. And I said, "Did you ever think about calling?" He goes, "I did call." I said, "At 3." But I don't know how intentional that was, but when he started with "We have a dilemma," it made me laugh. And first of all, there was probably some security in the fact that he's okay, and I did that. But he didn't start with an excuse. He just said, "We have a dilemma." And I go, "Yeah, we have a dilemma." So I always tell people, if you're parenting, especially often my parenting advice is toward people that are in foster care or adopting children. You must hone your sense of humor to survive it. It is.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot going on, and if you don't realize there's going to be a lot of humor, and you got to be able to look at the absurdity of it all, because it can be very stressful, and humor can help you see it much differently.
And I'll end on one final note, a reminder that when you aren't seeing it differently, when you aren't seeing the absurd part, that's a flag.
Yes.
That's a flag to you. That's basically a message saying, lighten up.
Yeah. And we human beings, as I said, have a lot of things going for us. We have a lot of systems in our body that are intended for our health and growth and prosperity and repair. And often left out of that is the value of humor in all of that. Humor sort of is have you ever heard the concept that insulin is sort of the top hormone that doesn't control so many things? Humor, I believe, is sort of the underlying thing of every symptom, because the body will respond to humor in a really positive way more than anything else.
That makes total sense to me. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for keeping this a light hour talking about good and evil.
I love that. Yes.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you, podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye.
See you guys.